countries are the very good friend of United States. Why we don't bring democracy in these societies? So these kind of people do not fester in these societies.
And this is your question is for the congressman.
My question to the congressman, why we don't promote the democracy in the Arab world as we promote democracy in Eastern world, Eastern Europe?
Well, there are limits to the power of the United States. I think the United States has tried over the years to promote democracy. Certainly the United States Information Agency, the radio broadcasts and so forth. But especially during the Cold War, which ended only 10 years ago, the United States found itself in alliance with a lot of countries that weren't great democracies because we had to oppose the communist world, or felt we had to. Now, Egypt, for example, is supposedly a friend of the United States, and in some ways it is. On the other hand, the government-controlled press in Egypt foments the most vicious racism and anti-Semitism and even anti-American feelings. I think because that's a way for the government to appease the fundamentalist Islamic movements in that country. They feel that that's something they have to do politically. I'm not sure what the United States, I mean, should we have been? I think we should have been, and I think we should now put more pressure on countries like Egypt and the Palestinian Authority, for example, to stop promoting this kind of anti-Semitic and viciously racist propaganda. That's actually part of the Oslo Agreement the Palestinian Authority signed, which they never agreed to. But the United States is not in a position to impose democracy on other countries. We can put pressure to a degree. Now, certainly, I agree on a different level with what was being said before by Mr. Zogby. We have to make sure that in the United States itself, and where we can really affect things to a much greater degree, that we educate our own people that the evil people who did this are not representative of all Muslims or of all whoever, and certainly not of Arabs or Muslims who live in the United States, a small number of whom may sympathize with these people, but most of whom, the great majority of whom, do not. We do not want to see. We made a terrible mistake in World War II when we interned Americans of Japanese ancestry. We made another terrible mistake when foreign nationals from enemy countries who had fled those countries because they disagreed with the Nazi regime were suspected. So we have to be very careful about protecting civil liberties and civil rights of minority groups in our own country.
Let me do some emails and phone calls here. We're getting an awful lot of emails from Canada. We seem to have a lot of friends in Ontario. Sean says, as a nation of peacekeepers, Canadians stand behind our brothers and sisters in the United States in any action necessary to combat these heinous acts of terror. Colin in Ontario says, as a Canadian, I feel pain for America. As a father and a firefighter, I feel worse for the American people. If asked, I would be there in a heartbeat. Richard Diaz says, Puerto Rico is with you. As American citizens, we fought bravely in your wars. We will fight with you on this one as well. Count on us. God bless America. Let me go to Clinton on the phone in California. Clinton?
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm 63 years old, and if they called me today and they wanted me to go fight, I would go fight. And I'm thinking that I hear a lot of this talk, and even if they arrested bin Laden, what good would that do? Because somebody's to take his place. They've got to go out to the nation or nations that did this act on American citizens. That's all I had to say about
All right. Clinton, thank you very much. This is an interesting email I've gotten from Gavin in Philadelphia, who says, I am friends with Pakistani engineers where I work. They have lived here for years. How can I not worry that they are part of a sleeper network of terrorist supporters? I wish James Zogby was still here, but Congressman...
That is one of the really insidious effects of this type of terrorism. There are sleeper agents, and one of the things that any enemy of the United States will try to do is to have us distrusting each other. You can't look at everybody of a generally Arabic appearance, or everybody who came from Pakistan 20 years ago, or for that matter 20 months ago, and worry that he may be a sleeper. There are sleeper agents, but the odds that your friends or that the people living next door are sleepers are minuscule. There are millions of people in this country with Middle East, not just Middle East, but Southern Asian backgrounds. Maybe there are 20 or 30 sleeper agents, who knows, or 40 or 50. We cannot start looking at everybody else in the United States as an enemy. leave that to the FBI and to our government investigative agencies to figure out who the sleepers are, who the enemy agents are. We don't want to get to a McCarthyite situation. We looked at anybody who was to the left of, who had liberal sympathies and said maybe he's a communist.
That is the downside of it, and it's already happening. Matthew, for example, was telling us earlier that your uncle, correct, in Florida? Oh, that was Mohammed or Magdi. One of you was. Magdi, you were telling me your uncle had been a victim of this already. Matthew, well, go ahead, Magdi. You tell us about it first.
Well, his house was vandalized. Actually, on his garage and on his mailbox, the F word was put, and Muslims was put next to it. And then he got some phone calls telling him to get out of the neighborhood. I'm not sure whether people wanted to protect him or they were just telling him to get out. And there were also people run off the road in certain places. Someone had her hand broken at a university in Florida. I'm not going to say which one, but various acts have been perpetrated.
Heavens.
Let me add here, if I can. The president and Governor Pataki and Mayor Giuliani have been very good in speaking out against this kind of hate crime or a generalization. The essence of prejudice is to generalize and say because one Muslim or 50 Muslims did these terrible things, therefore all Muslims or all Jews or all Irish or all whoever are terrible, dangerous people. That's the essence of discrimination and prejudice. I think it's the duty of all elected officials to speak out and warn people against this kind of conduct, and it's the duty of our law enforcement agencies when they find it, because there will be some people who will do that. In any society, you get people who are going to disobey the law, and these are illegal acts. Hate crimes are illegal, and they should be punished.
I'm sure there may be some fear about reporting them, which there shouldn't be, but that sort of goes along with it. Matthew, you had a story about your friend?
Well, it's not a story about a particular friend at all, but I will bring Jerry into it. But I think this country also needs to realize that the identity or the image that they have of what an American is kind of skewed. I'm an American. And that idea of, like, it's not just a white person or a black person. There's those of us in colors in between. Our names, they can be Saurabh, Jagjit, Omar. You know, our names come from, just like anybody else, our grandfathers, our forefathers before us. But we are Americans, and like I mentioned to you all before, if I was drafted, I would go to war because I am an American man. But like you had this person mention through the email about, you know, I'm afraid of these Pakistani coworkers. That's ridiculous to say such things, because we love our country just as much. I went to preschool here. I grew up, I'm just as American. This is my identity. And I'm proud of the skin color, and I'm proud of where my parents come from as well, and that's also my identity. But it hurts as an American to hear my fellow Americans say that they're afraid of me. I get second looks. You don't know where I'm from. But it's really bothersome, and I think I ask all of America to realize that we are in this together, and don't judge us by the way that we look. And I want to point to my friend Jerry. He's of the Sikh religion. They wear turbans on their head, and a lot of people have confused these folks. You see pictures of the folks from the Taliban. They also wear turbans. That's a regional thing. Jerry he's not Muslim. He's of a completely different religion, but there's been violence committed against people of his faith as well, because people are ignorant and don't understand. And Jerry's just like me. We grew up in America. We went to college together here. And I just think it's ridiculous to attack us because of the way we look. And honestly, this is an issue that African Americans faced in the 60s. We are not anything different. We are equals, and we're Americans.
I had something here.
Jerry, did you want to comment on this?
Yes.
Quickly?
I'd like to say that I am a Sikh American, and as part of our religious uniform, we're required to wear turbans and keep our head covered. And a lot of people do mistake us for these terrorists because, as you see on the media, when you see the pictures of Osama bin Laden, you see him wearing a turban and keeping his head covered and so forth. I have spoken to many of my friends across this country, and they've told me of stories of people, Sikhs and Arabs and Muslims, being chased, being beaten. And we're not the targets. We're all in this together. We need to find these select few people who are committing these attacks against humanity and go after them.
And one more phone call on this. Sandy in Alabama. Sandy, go ahead.
I am an American citizen. I am also a Muslim woman, and I cannot hide the fact that I am a Muslim. I fear for my life for just stepping out the door. Since this thing happened, I have been in my home. And I was wondering how, and as this escalates, how am I supposed to feel safe? When is it going to be safe for me to go out of my home? And when is it going to be safe for my children to go back to school?
All right, Sandy, thank you. Hezbon, you're from Kenya.
Yeah, I'm from Kenya, and as everybody knows, like 2 years ago, we had just a problem like this. We had a bombing in Nairobi, which the U.S. embassy was bombed, and as Kenya, we lost a lot of people. And I share the feeling with the Americans, and I know the way they feel because it happened to us, 2 years ago. But I'm asking myself, when this thing happened in Kenya and it happened right now here in the United States, and I'm asking myself that why is it happening? I'm asking myself again and again, why? And why do these people really hate? There must be something for it. Why do you really hate, and why are you doing these kind of things? And I'm asking myself again and again, and I can't get any answer at all. So that's only my comment.
Let me comment on that if I could.
Mm-hmm.
There doesn't always have to be a rational reason. When you look throughout history at why minority groups were hated, why were the Jews hated in Germany or in other countries, it was not because of anything they did. If they were successful in businesses, that was a cause of discrimination. If they weren't successful, that was a cause of discrimination. It didn't matter. They were called communists and capitalists, both. The fact is that the United States is the dominant country in the world today. It represents freedom, it represents democracy, it represents modernity, and there are groups who feel threatened by all of those, by modern society, by democracy, by freedom, and they hate us for that reason, for who we are and what we are, not because of anything we're doing. As I said earlier in the program, it is striking that these terrorists, Osama, whoever did this, the people who've done other terrorist acts in the past, they didn't ask us, they didn't demand anything of us. They didn't say, change your policy on this, change your policy on that. They just bombed us, because their opposition to us is not based on a specific policy. It's not based because of the Middle East crisis or anything else. It's because of who and what we are, and there's nothing we can do in all likelihood to change that. And we simply have to defeat them and take away their ability to harm us, because they're going to exercise that just because of who and what we are. And if it seems not rational, it isn't.
An email from Lacey at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico says, if we don't fight to keep our freedom, we will eventually lose it to those responsible for these attacks on America. My husband is currently in Saudi Arabia, and I fear I will never see him again. But if I don't, I will know that he fought for me, for you, and for America's freedom. Christina.
Yes, I'd like to hear our leaders' thoughts on long-term changes we can make in the U.S. role overseas. I think it's time for us as citizens to educate ourselves about our country's history in developing countries, and for our leaders to really question themselves and ask, is it still necessary for us to have places like the School of the Americas in Fort Benning, Georgia, where we train military leaders that then turn around and abuse and oppress their own citizens? Is it still necessary for us to put dictators in power and support those corrupt governments? And that's what we've done over and over in various countries. I think too often we've been looking at short-term problems, and we're not looking at what's truly right for a democratic country to be supporting, and we're creating resentment overseas. I'd like to hear our leaders' thoughts on how we can change that.
Well, I don't know who. I'm one of the leaders, I suppose, and I can only give you my own views, which are my own. I agree with you on the School of the Americas. I have voted repeatedly to eliminate the School of the Americas because of the abuses of what it has done. I think that most of the abuses of putting dictators into power are historical at this point. They were done in the context of the Cold War, in the perceived necessity of defeating the communist enemy. I don't think we're doing that right now. I think that the war on drugs, however, is leading us into some of the same mistakes in places in Latin America that the war on communism led us into in Europe and Asia and Latin America, and that's a whole different subject. We ought to promote, to the extent we can, democracy abroad, but we shouldn't attempt to impose it on people. There are people in this world, there are countries with vastly different cultural traditions of the United States, and you can't impose different traditions, different ways of life on them. It's not our business to do so. We should promote